Welcome to episode number 45 of Broad Street Hustle. I'm your host, Jason Sayeda. Tonight, we'll give a brief rundown of our thoughts on the NCAA tournament, which started yesterday. We'll also touch on the bleak situation going on with the Flyers, and we'll take a look at the goings on with the NFL free agency as my allergies start to torture me. But anyway, the Eagles did a few surprising things this week, I thought, as far as retaining a few players and then also adding a few guys. So we'll get into all that. Tonight, our usual co-host Tom and Nanny can't join us, but I am joined by Jimmy the Chalk. Chalky, how are you?
Doing wonderful. Accident free for over a week now. So
I was going to say no catastrophes to report this week, I would assume.
Not as of yet.
Okay, cool. That's good news. And we're also joined by our other co-host, Christopher Meeker. What's up, Meeker?
What's up, guys? Fresh off of a dominating appearance of the OFB this year. Pumped for the baseball season, but also pumped to talk about NFL free agency, little NCAA.
Yeah. So, all right, let's get into it. Like I mentioned, I thought the Eagles did a couple of surprising things to me. I kind of surprised by the retention of or the retaining of Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham mostly. But then they also added a few cogs with them adding Rashad Penny and Marcus Mariota, but they did lose a couple of key contributors to their defense in Javon Hargrave and also the linebacker who is escaping me right now.
TJ Edwards.
Yeah. Well, both starting linebackers, not named Hassan Reddick, but
exactly. So anyway, let's get into it. Chalky, what are your thoughts on start with the Eagles first, and then we'll jump into the other NFL signings.
Yeah, when we were talking, I guess right after the season, going through like who's available. I mean, and Howie said it, I think even before the Super Bowl, like the way things were lined up with who was going to be on the market, like there wasn't going to be a way to keep everybody because you had guys that were going to be getting decent contracts and they weren't in a bleak cap situation, but you just weren't going to be able to keep everybody. So I think anybody was thinking the Eagles were going to come out of free agency possibly as a better team, or even the draft as a better team, were kind of kidding themselves because they didn't have that kind of capital. Now, Howie can always make trades, but as far as signing or drafting, they weren't going to be immediately a better team than they were necessarily at the end of last season. So, the big loss, obviously, at this point is Hargrave. Not unexpected from my part. He was going to get top of the market. And the second biggest loss, if he ends up not coming back, it would be Gardner Johnson, who's still kind of floating around out there. The safety and D-back market has been a little weak aside from Bates on Cincinnati, who got he's one of the best safeties, but he got really an above the market contract. As far as what the Eagles did, Kelsey coming back was a no-brainer. It was his call. Like we talked before, I thought Graham was likely as long as he wasn't necessarily looking to get paid on an 11 sack year, so $6 million a year, whatever he got, perfectly fine. Cox surprised me, and not that $10 million a year is a bad contract. I think if he plays like he did last year, $10 million is a good deal, but I don't know that he's going to play back to even last year, which was a bounce back year. So that could be a couple million too high in the end. Most surprising thing, obviously, was that they maintained their starting cornerbacks in finding a way to get Bradbury back and then not cutting Slate in the end. It looked like he was gone. I thought that was going to open the door to get Johnson back, but Gardner Johnson, but which still could happen, I guess, because if he only ends up getting $7 million on the market, Howie could find a way. The Penny signing, I like a lot. I mean, he's getting less guaranteed money than Boston Scott. His problem is staying healthy. If you look at any of his metrics, they're outstanding on, whether it's the old style yards per carry or advanced metrics of yards after hit, yards past expected on the run. He's played just over like 50% of the games possible in his career. But they're not going to ask him to carry the ball 20 times a game. So I think that's fine, especially at the price. And it doesn't preclude you from drafting him back somewhere in the draft if you want to go that route.
Yeah, I obviously he's got the injury history. The other thing that was surprising to me was he does not catch the ball out of the backfield at all.
No, they still really don't have that.
Yeah, I mean that probably means that Gainwell's going to just have a bigger part in the offense this year, I would think.
No, for sure. I mean, he's gonna move on. And like I said, they seem to like Sermon, but they could draft somebody in the middle round and displace one of those guys, and you're not like taking a big cap hit.
Yeah.
And then they brought in Mariota, which I think was off air last week. We talked about it, and he would have been the most likely on my board.
Yeah, he's a perfect backup.
So
yeah.
I think Howie's done the best he can with this hand he was dealt and the possibilities, and he's still got a little time to work a little magic, but. You hate to lose Hargrave and lose him to the team that he went to, which we can talk about later as far as around the league. But all in all, a decent enough job on Howie's part so far, I think.
Meeker, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, they obviously are trying to run it back a little bit. Bringing back some of the vets and Graham and Cox and Slay and Bradbury. So I think they kept more free agents on the defense than I thought they would, to be honest. I thought they would have lost a lot more than what they lost. And I mean, look, Hargrave is 30 years old. I'm not really sure that that's completely old, for a defensive tackle, but, for a 30-year-old defensive tackle making what, 84 million over 4 years, whatever his contract was. I mean, they had to make that decision to let him walk if that's what he was going to get. I'm wondering whether or not, if they don't sign C.J. Gardner-Johnson, if it was a smarter move to bring Slay back versus dedicating that money towards C.J. Because I kind of have a feeling that, I don't know that it spelled the end of his tenure here in Philly, but I think he's going to demand a little bit too much for what the Eagles have to be able to spend on a slot corner.
You also have to wonder.
They kept their.
I was just going to say
they kept their cornerbacks, which I think was their main cornerbacks, which is great. But CJ's more of a slot corner. He's not really a press corner or natural corner. But that slot corner is is a pretty big part of today's defense in the NFL. So that's why he's going to get some big money.
Well, what I was going to say is you have to remember now they have that 10th pick. So that could play into it, right? If there's somebody that they like, that they have their eye on at 10, that they think they're probably reasonably going to get, then that's probably playing into what they're doing with Gardner-Johnson, I would think.
Well, do you take a safety at 10? I mean, no teams usually draft safeties that high in the draft, even if they have the pedigree like CJ does.
Yeah, I don't think there's I mean, I didn't look at the board today. I don't think there's a safety that's high. There's a couple cornerbacks that could be in the conversation at that pick, which is where prior to them bringing Bradbury back, even when it looked like that Slay was going to go, I mean, that would have been an obvious potential. I mean, now I think they have the luxury of not necessarily drafting for need. I think D-line is still your most likely position there because I mean, the way it's shaping up, you might have 4 quarterbacks go in the top 10. And so that's 6 picks for other things, and we'll see. We'll get into all that later. But the one thing I did want to mention when you were talking about the Slay, not that Johnson wouldn't have been agreeable to because he hasn't signed anything yet, but the cap savings that they would have gotten by cutting Slay, they were going to designate him as a June or July 1st cut or whatever it is. So they would have saved that money, but they don't get to use that money until June or July. So they basically would have likely had to have a verbal agreement with Johnson and say we can't sign you until Slay comes off the book. Maybe he, I got to think that came up in the conversation because once they said Slay's going to get released, like all the reports were that they were pushing hard to get something done with Gardner Johnson, and either he's not getting the market he thinks, or he wasn't maybe not necessarily agreeable to. I'll wait to sign that long down the road.
Well, he ended up on the Eagles because he didn't get the market he sought.
And I think at this point that might, if you're not going to find somebody like that every year, but I think that might be the route that they look to take, is that can they find a guy towards the end of his contract that is not necessarily, I mean, he was a steal for a 6th-round pick or whatever they got him for. The other option you could have, and I don't know how inclined they are, is Maddox really established himself as a solid nickelback this year. He's played some safety. You could toy with moving him back there if you don't bring Johnson back, because then you'd have 2 new safety. I mean, I guess they'd probably like Blankenship's son, so he could be in there. But do you move Maddox back and then try to find a slot corner, either draft or a trade. I don't know. So they have some flexibility, but Johnson's young though. Like all these guys we're talking about, they're signing. They're 30 years old. He's 25. He could probably still get better, and he had a pretty decent year. So he was the guy I was kind of hoping to see them sign, only because he would bring some more youth to the team. But I don't know he's worth $12 million a year. Like, I mean, if they can get him done at 8, that's probably more reasonable.
No.
But I don't know
I
what
don't
he
think
wants.
that's going to happen.
To me, safety is always a position where you could just start. You could slide in a aging cornerback there, and then kind of draft yourself. Like you said, Chalky, like maybe draft somebody at 10 as a corner. So I don't know if that would be Slay. I don't know what their thoughts were, but and then there's always the chance that they could trade back too, right? So they could trade back 5 picks, and maybe they have somebody in mind, and then just grab another second-round pick or something like that. So, it's going to be interesting to see what route they go there. But anything
The one
else?
thing that look the Eagles, yeah, I just want to say, I mean, like the Eagles' biggest strength last year was depth. And the thing you have to worry about, well, look, there's a new defensive coordinator. I'm not sure if he's going to come in with his own type of plan, but they were able to shift in and out and keep guys, pretty fresh on the defensive line, especially. And now, you lose some depth, and that's something they're probably going to have to look at in the draft. So that's why I say that top 10 pick isn't going to go to safety. That top 10 pick is probably going to be on the defensive line. Now they lose Epps. I don't know how much of a loss you think that guy, that is. But, I think the Eagles defense is going to definitely take a step back this year because they just don't have the depth coming into this year, and they're a year older. So we'll see. I mean, I would have gone for, I would have tried to sign CJ more, than Slay because of the age factor that Chalky just mentioned, and just for the importance of that position, plus what the draft may bring in corner, and having a little bit depth at corner, like you just said, with Maddox. But we'll see. But I think the biggest problem I think they're going to have is their depth, and being able to shift these defensive linemen in and out.
Yeah, I mean, they got pretty good injury luck this year. I mean, yes, you lost Hurts for a couple games, and you lost those games, whatever. You can't expect that every year. So, I mean, just, to be as healthy as they, Davis was really, and Maddox missed a couple games. But other than that, the defensive line was, I mean, Barnett went out game 1, but I forgot he was even on the team. Like, he's got 2 more years.
Is he a guy is he a guy who's still under contract?
Yeah, he's got a couple more years apparently. I thought they signed him for 1 year, and apparently it's like 3 potentially. So he's got more. He's got more years available. But
that might be a guy that, if he's healthy, that you can kind of shift in and out.
Yeah, I'm just not going to count on it. But I mean, it'd be nice as a depth piece, for sure. And then linebacker, they'll find something. I mean, Dean, I assume is primed to step in and play this year. But they still need to find another off-ball linebacker, and they don't spend big in free agency in that position. So I think where they obviously hit 2 home runs last year, as you mentioned, was the trade for Gardner Johnson, and then the dumb luck on their part of the Giants mismanaging their cap numbers and having to release Bradbury in the summer or whatever it was. So I mean, they'll be on the market for that kind of thing, and I'm sure there's players that will want to come play here for a chance to win a championship in the next year. They're running it back, like you said, and it's probably 24-25 is going to be one of those years that they'll try to ride the offense because some bills are going to come due and they're going to have to get younger. But I mean, with the way the NFC is shaping up, it's still a lot of the same teams that you weren't as good as you last year. So if you can get back to the Super Bowl, you got to take your shot now. And they're not locking these guys up to 5-year deals either. It's essentially 1-year deals on a lot of the guys we're talking about, aside from Bradbury.
Yeah, for me, I think this is probably their window here, right? Because their window shuts once they have to pay Hurts. So, you know what I mean? That's trouble. You're going to have to pay him, and that's going to, negate a lot of your flexibility as far as spending. So, Last year, like we said, was a great opportunity for them. This is probably their last best chance. So you would think they have to get it right. So we'll see
Their
with
main
Howie.
competition. Yeah, I'm sorry. Keep going, Jay.
No, that's cool. Good.
I was going to say their main competition, which I would consider Dallas, they didn't do anything, barely anything in free agency. Giants,
What I cut
eh,
Elliott.
yeah, I mean, but they didn't. They
Yeah.
haven't replaced them. They haven't. They haven't really done too much. They re-signed Van Der Esch, and from what I see here, top 50 free agents that have signed, none of them say Dallas next to their name. So I don't think Dallas has done a whole lot to improve, at least in free agency. The Giants, they made a couple of signings.
They traded for
Washington,
Waller too. They traded for Darren Waller.
yeah, that was
Yeah.
big. That was big
Yeah.
for the Giants in that trade. But I don't know that any team in the NFC East was really active in free agency that I can see so far. Now there's still some names left, and who knows where they land. But right now, I would say Eagles did just as well as anybody else, if not better, so far in free agency.
Yeah, I think Dallas's best move was picking up Gilmore for like a 5th round pick or whatever. I mean, he's not
Yeah.
he's not in the conversation for best cornerback in the league anymore like he was a few years ago, but
He's solid.
he was
He's solid.
still solid last year, and that's where they really suffered because they had a couple injuries there and they couldn't cover on the one side of the field. So if he's got anything left, it was a cheap pickup, so that'll improve. That'll work for them, I think. But yeah, they didn't have no big signings on that part, and really, I mean, NFC, not that many teams got better to the point where I'm like, oh, they're. I mean, sure, it's a team could come out of nowhere, but I think this is the window, like Jason was saying, and you take your shot for this year, and you maybe make a trade in the draft to get another pick, and you get a bunch of young guys in that in 2 or 3 years you hope are contributing to keep a second window open. But I think 24 and 25 are going to be the years you got to be a little bit concerned about. But 23 is going for it again.
So let's jump to the rest of the league. Couple interesting things going on. I guess the most interesting thing, right, is what's going to happen with Rodgers. Kind of seems like he's destined to go to the Jets. I guess the Jets are kind of playing hardball right now with Green Bay, or vice versa.
Might be vice versa. Yeah, I
might
think
be
it's
vice versa. But
Yeah.
what are our thoughts there, Meeker?
Just on Rodgers. I mean, it's like
Rodgers.
third year in a row that this guy holds the NFL hostage with his decisions and going into hiding for a week before he comes out and says, "Hey, I should be a New York Jet. That's what I always wanted to be." I don't know. I mean, do I think that it's going to happen? Probably. Do I think that Green Bay has every right to ask for as much as they possibly can ask for in this deal? Definitely. And could that end up being where it becomes a stalemate and, this just kind of drags on for a while? It might. I mean, but, when I look at if the possibility turns into reality, does that make the Jets a Super Bowl contender? And, they play in a tough division. They have some talent on offense. They're a pretty good defense. I think they have the defensive rookie of the year, right? And Sauce Gardner. And
the offensive rookie of the year.
And and the wide receiver, right? Garrett. So yeah, I mean, I think they're in the mix, but you have some really good teams in the IFC. You have the Super Bowl champs, Kansas City. You have Buffalo in their own division. You have Cincinnati, who's going to be, we might talk about it. They've improved their offensive line in the free agency. So I mean, he's going to be in the mix. I thought, like, if he was going to go anywhere and he was actually thinking he would, contend for a Super Bowl, he would have been better off staying in the NFC. But I guess, there was no real teams there that either A, wanted to play this game, or B, that the Packers might be willing to trade him to. So, yeah, I mean, look, you're probably getting 2 years out of him before he probably decides to retire. So you have a small window. Maybe he saves Salah's job if he goes to New York, because if they had to go another year with that mess they had at quarterback, I'm not real sure if he would have maintained his job. So if anyone's going to be happy in this situation, it'd be Robert Saleh. I do think it's going to happen. But look, Green Bay is going to play hardball, and I think, do they deserve 2 first-round picks? Because that's what I'm hearing. Like, that's what Green Bay wants. Maybe not 2 first-round picks, but maybe a first and a 2 in a future year, and that might get it done. We'll see what happens. What do you think?
Talkie?
This is not going to be a popular comment for at least one of the hosts here. If I'm giving up 2 first-round picks for a quarterback and I'm the Jets, I'm signing Lamar Jackson to an offer sheet. I'm not trading 2 first-round picks for Aaron Rodgers. I'm sorry. I don't know that either deal gets you to the Super Bowl in the AFC, but I'll take a longer window that hasn't had as high of a ceiling, possibly with Jackson than Rodgers. I mean, Rodgers finds a way every year now to seem to be disruptive, whether in its personal life and relationships or with the team now, like you said, for 3 straight years. I really, at this point, it's hard to trust anything he says. I have a hard time believing that he didn't think that he went into his darkness retreat and somehow he had no idea that the Packers might want to move on. They drafted a quarterback 3 years ago. Like you change them on every year. It's that whole thing is a mess. And then it's, he wants these guys on the Jets, and he says, "Oh, people make stuff up." He texts Adam Schefter, "Lose my number." But yet, since that report came out, and he said, "No, it's not true," they've signed 2 of the guys on that list, and they're talking to Odell Beckham, who was the other guy on that list. So either somebody in the Jets leaked something and said, "These are the guy we want," say that this is who Rodgers is asking for, or it's a coincidence if it's not the truth, like a very big coincidence. So, look, like it gives them a shot. Look, they got a lot of good young players, like you were saying, and hey, look, if he can recapture that what he had a couple years ago, sure. But you have so many horses in that conference. I don't think it makes him a top 3 team in the conference. Is it impossible they win? No. Look, last year he struggled, and whether that was because he didn't have Devontae Adams, okay, so you lose arguably the best receiver in the league, take a step back, or is it like he's 40 years old and he just doesn't have that level anymore? Be interesting to see. I would not be giving up 2 first-round picks for him because the Packers are in a situation now where if he decides he wants to come back and play, there's like a $60 million cap hit or something like that they got to figure out how to make work, or you don't build around the rest of the team. So the Packers want to trade him or see him retire. Either way, they don't want to have to take him back, and he doesn't want to go back. But if he decides to go back, it's going to cause a big problem with their cap situation.
I think what you might wind up seeing is maybe they do some kind of contingency on the draft pick type thing. Like, if he plays 3 years, maybe it's the 2 first-round picks, or if he only plays 2 years, it's a first and a second or something like that. Or, depending on, if he makes the Pro Bowl or some craziness like that.
I think that's reasonable. If it's like you get 2 first-round picks, if he wins you the Super Bowl, okay. But, I have a lot of contingencies.
Yeah, I'm still a Rodgers fan. I know he's a little loopy with, some of the stuff he does and all, but I still see the arm talent. I still see, maybe not quite what it was 5 to 10 years ago, but it's still there. I think he's still capable of winning a Super Bowl. I'm not convinced on Lamar Jackson winning the Super Bowl. I just think when push comes to shove in the playoffs and you need to throw the ball, he hasn't proven to me that he could do it yet. So Rodgers has. I know he only won 1 Super Bowl, but Green Bay the last couple of years hasn't surrounded him with the greatest team around them. So, it's is it the chicken or the egg theory? Is Rodgers slipping a little bit, or was Green Bay slipping overall? I don't know. I guess we'll see it with the Jets. They have a nice roster. They have his offensive coordinator's there, Hackett, so he knows the offense, or he will know the offense.
Professes love for Hackett. So
what's that?
In that interview the other day, he was like, best guy in the league. So the theory of Denver bringing in Hackett to try to trade for Rodgers might not have been that far-fetched.
How'd that work out in Denver? Didn't work out so well.
Exactly.
Right, it did not work out. But again, how the whole adage of some guys just can't be head coaches, but are good coordinators.
Yeah, the one I think where Rodgers, and I agree with a lot of what you said about his talent still. I think where he's taking the biggest step back is mobility. He could run a little bit and keep plays alive and make some of those throws. He wasn't showing that last year. Now maybe his line was worse than it had been, but he certainly wasn't moving quick enough. And like the Eagles were all over him, like that one game. Eagles, you could say best defensive line in the league, whatever. But I honestly don't know how good the Jets line is or isn't. But yes, if he gives him the time to sit there, some of his arm stuff is still there, but he's having trouble. I mean, he's 40, but making plays like he used to when the time called for it. So that's where I think his biggest regression has been so far as a player, at least the past year.
Yeah, so I know Meeker's short on time, so I don't know if we want to jump to any other NFL teams real fast, or if we wanted to go right to the NCAA tournament. What do you guys think? You have anything else in the NFL?
I mean, I'm for getting back to the conversation about Lamar. I think Lamar has kind of like backed himself into a corner at this point, because a lot of these teams are making their moves for quarterbacks. And at this point, I'm really not sure where he can go that's a better option than just going back to Baltimore.
I agree. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but what he did, and a lot of people are saying, oh, it's collusion because all these teams are coming out and say, oh, we're not going to go after him. Guess what? When you sit out, when you should be playing, and the other, 54 guys around you or 53 guys or however many are on the roster, see that, players don't like that, and teams don't like that. And football's a different sport than all these other sports. Like, it's, you're all in this together in football. And if a guy's refusing to play when he should be playing, I don't think that's seen well around the league. And I think that's a big part of it. And I agree with you, Meeker. I don't know what he's going to do now. Like, where's he going? Probably he's going to go back to Baltimore.
I think he has to. I mean, the only other team I can think of that he can start and they can be competitive because they do have some talent on offense is Washington. But I mean, I don't know if.
Well, here's the thing: is Washington,
what their situation is. Go ahead.
Here's why Washington is not going to sign him, and I've learned this in the last, how the league works. So when I forget what it's called, but when an NFL team guarantees X amount of money, the team has to take whatever that is. So I forget how much Watson got, but let's just say it's going to be 100 million plus guaranteed, whatever comes out of contract. That team at the time has to take that money and put it in escrow because it's guaranteed. So the league doesn't want the team defaulting and not being able to make that payment, which is one of the reasons why owners are hesitant to guarantee, also because they didn't cut them for nothing. But Washington's about to get sold, it sounds like. Snyder is not going to take $200 million or whatever it might take to sign an offer sheet that Baltimore might not match and guarantee that and put that in escrow when he's about to sign to sell the team. And I think, they just brought in Brissett. They got Howell. I thought that was a logical spot for him until I learned a little bit about that. Snyder as an owner isn't going to take 200. Nobody thinks he'll take 200 million out of his pocket or whatever it'll take and put that in escrow to guarantee that contract, which is why like some of the other cash poor teams, like a team like the Bengals, Burrow's contract's coming up. If there was going to be a hiccup, it would be guaranteed money up front because the Brown family is not one of these billionaire families. They've had the team since inception 60 years ago. They're not a cash rich team where they can just take that money and right off the top and put it there. So, but anyway, I learned that about the NFL salary structure in the last couple of weeks.
That's interesting. I mean, I never thought about that, but I was the only team I can think of that he can go to that isn't kind of depleted, that can compete, that maybe, it makes some sense. But I really think that it's going to end up where he's just going to go back to the Ravens. And I said that a long time ago, not for all the different reasons that ended up surfacing, but I thought that was his best move anyway from the start. But he's kind of put himself in a bad spot also with ownership there. And as Jason alluded to, I don't know. I mean, it's not a good situation for him. Plus, he doesn't have an agent. No one's really advising him properly.
That's true.
So
yeah.
I'm not sure, like, if he trying to make his own decisions. I'm sure he's got advisors, but no one's truly representing him.
Yep. Yeah. All right. So
I don't have a whole lot of time left, guys. Unfortunately.
Yeah. So if you give us like 5 more minutes, Meeker, we'll jump into NCAA. We could leave with you. Thoughts on, I don't know if you want to talk about what you saw or what your predictions are, or give us your final four, but the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, some of at least my final four is still alive, but we saw some pretty big upsets in the first round here. I saw UConn go down today. No, I'm sorry, not UConn. I
No.
saw who is a big team that went down today? Chalky might be able to help me out here.
Creighton was losing. Did
Yeah,
they lose?
none of the big teams
Well,
went down
Arizona went
today.
yesterday.
Yesterday,
Arizona
yeah.
went down yesterday. So that's what I was thinking of. But when going into the tournament's fascinating because you obviously have all these little mid-major teams that can that we never see play. That have guys that are probably they're making the tournament, so they probably have guys that are mainly juniors and seniors on the team and playing with each other for 3 or 4 years, and the teams that are usually the ones that are in the tournament and they have pro ready guys are only staying a year or two with the one and dones. So it's not, you're always going to see the upsets, but if I'm looking at, what I feel the strongest teams are coming into the tournament, I'm really surprised that Duke won the ACC tournament going into the tournament. And that's not always a good thing because now you have to string together about 10 wins in a row after winning your tournament. But they're playing really well. I saw them play last night against Oral Roberts, kind of blew them away. And obviously, I'm excited about Penn State. Do I think they're going to get anywhere with it? Probably not. So my final four coming into the tournament was Alabama and Marquette. I think Marquette is a really good team. On this side, I faded Kansas a little bit and took Gonzaga. It's not. I don't think it's going to be Gonzaga's year. Mark Few still hasn't won a championship. He's probably the best coach in college that has never won a championship. And then on the other side, Texas. Those were my final four. Texas looked pretty good against, again, it's Colgate, but when everyone gets excited when they talk about these games just to kind of pump it up and say, oh, Colgate, yeah, they're a good team. Texas better watch out. Well, they beat him by 20. So they get Penn State next. And that's tomorrow night. So we'll see how that goes. But those are my final fours. We'll see what happens. So far, I haven't lost anybody. Houston's a team you have to watch, but Houston's got a little bit of injury problems right now. And they're playing Auburn coming up tomorrow night. I think that's going to be a tough matchup for them as well. So I can see a team like Houston losing in the Sweet 16. They're a 1 seed. Purdue's a 1 seed. They're actually losing right now to Fairleigh Dickinson. I think they're a little bit of a fraud one. And Kansas, it's really hard to repeat in the NCAA tournament. So I could see them losing somewhere along the line. Originally, I thought UConn had a good chance of beating them. They'll face them in the next round if both Kansas and UConn get through their next matchup. So those are my final fours.
All right, and then I don't know if you want to jump. I know you have to run, but feel free.
Yeah, I'll leave you guys to it. I'll see you guys later.
All right, thanks for joining, Meeker.
You got it.
So Chalky, we will jump to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm glad we recorded this on Friday because in past years I've had a history of having some of my championship picks get knocked out in the first day. So that hasn't, last year the two teams I wanted going into the tournament were Kansas and Kentucky. One of them won, and one of them got knocked out in the first round. So, the team I liked the most, I guess I would say coming in was Texas. And Texas is actually the one.
Oh, kind of lost you. I don't know if you got muted there or.
Yeah, I guess it went on mute for a second. I don't know how that happened, but anyway. So Texas was at, anywhere between 12 and 14 to win the tournament at the start. I like them. I actually bet against them yesterday for first half. I had Colgate +8, and of course Texas covered by they covered by 1. They were up 9 at the half, so I lost. That's the only bet game wise bet I've made on the tournament so far. But I like them. I think Duke is playing real well, so they're a team that I think coming out, in that region. I wasn't big on Purdue. Obviously, as we said, they're on upset alert right now with 6 minutes left. They're losing. But I thought Duke, or I was taking a little flyer on Michigan State. It's not Izzo's most talented team, but he's a great coach and he gets teams to the Final Four. So,
Yep.
As a longer shot down there. And then on the other side, Kansas, I did have, and then in the other region, Texas was there, right? And then so then Alabama, but they have some injury issues. I mean, it's kind of wide open at the top because it seems like almost every team that you would consider top 10 has some sort of issue, either a major player or two being hurt. Kansas's coach has been in the hospital for a week. Texas had to fire their coach in the middle of the season because he was arrested for domestic assault. Like, there's something going on with like every one of the top the teams on the top two lines, pretty much. And if it wasn't before the tournament, it is now because Alabama's had the kid with the shooting incident and then getting asked about that. Now he didn't play well yesterday, and Houston's best player is hurt. So it's wide open, I think, but we'll see. I had a couple quick stats just to throw out there. Yesterday was favorites. It split 8-8. Favorites are underdogs covering. 5 of the underdogs won outright. Today, thus far, as we're going to the night games, has been fairly formful. 6 out of the 8 favorites have covered thus far, and only 1 underdog has won outright. So yesterday was interesting. I had some of those big upsets, and today's been pretty chalky to this point. But like I said, Fairleigh Dickinson is currently ahead. We'll see if it holds up. Yeah.
So for me, I've not followed the NCAA too much this year. What I've been doing is I go to the Ken Palm rankings, and I know he's got that one trend where if a team is top 25 in offensive and defensive efficiency, those are the teams that, for the most part, are going to win the championship. So in doing that, there are 5 teams that qualify there. Houston, UCLA, UConn, Texas, and Alabama. So what I did was I took those 5 teams and I did a 5-team parlay to make the Elite 8. Using those teams, I got 65-1. Thought that was good value. That's my only NCAA bet. And as of Friday night, right now, it is still alive. So I'm happy. I'm sure now that I said that, by tomorrow, one of them will be out. But Houston's a little scary to me because they got the injury issues, like I think Meeker had mentioned. So little concerned with Houston, but
and they had Northern Kentucky played them real tough last night. Like that was a close game with 9 minutes to go or whatever.
Yeah. So maybe it'd be a good idea for me to throw something. I'm sure it'll be favored. Throw something on whoever they're playing on the money line or something like that. You know what I mean? Maybe try to hedge a little bit with them. But,
I can see what the look ahead is on that. But Auburn. I don't think a lot of people thought Auburn was going to get past Iowa. So you'll probably get you could probably get a decent money line bet on that. UCLA was a team I looked at, but they got like 2 of their better players hurt. I mean, like they blew out Asheville yesterday, but and they should beat Northwestern. Their challenge will be if it's Gonzaga or maybe even Arizona State. Like if they can pull something out. But I mean, it's not. I think it's a good bet. Like you have, like it's certainly a fun one, and those are all good teams. So
I mean, 65-1. Throw $5 on it.
Yep.
That's my tournament bet. So, all right. So I guess we'll kind of close with our thoughts on the Flyers. Flyers are always near and dear to my heart. My favorite team growing up. Hockey was my favorite sport growing up. I think it's changed recently. Not for the better for my thoughts, but the Flyers certainly have, back in the day and when I was growing up, they were always the best organization in the city. Constantly contending, always winning, with an owner who is passionate and always wanting to win. And it's the complete opposite now. I mean, they are by far and away the worst organization in the city right now. Interest in hockey is really dwindling in the city. It's not a good situation. Chalky, any thoughts before I go into a longer diatribe on what's wrong with them?
I mean, I won't get into specifics. I'm sure you'll cover it all, but I mean, it is the polar opposite of where we were. I guess 25 years ago, if you want to go back that far, where there were some lean sports years in the late 90s in the city of Philadelphia, but the Flyers were the only.
Yep.
They got to the Cup in '97, and they were a contender every year, while the Eagles were winning 3 games, Sixers were terrible, about to get good, and then the Phillies were still a joke. So it's flipped on its edge, and I think there's a lot of reasons, a lot of which we've talked about already, mismanagement on several levels, but I mean, it's sad, and for me, it's hockey was a game I was watching less and less, only because that you know that '90s game that I was really starting to watch, and then even in the 2000s, the more physical aspect. Look, I love the fights, all that, like that's gone, which is okay, but it's a different game, and I probably don't enjoy it as much because the Flyers they've won one playoff series in the last decade. That certainly affects it, but yeah, they got a lot of issues, and maybe they can get lucky and get the first pick in the draft this year. But short of that, there's not a quick fix that's going to help them out.
I have a theory on that. Yeah. So all right, I'll start. So for me, I don't think the Flyers have been a legitimate contender for like 20 years, right? Now you could look at 2010 and say, oh well, they got to the Stanley Cup Finals and they lost in overtime in Game 6, which I was at, unfortunately. But I see that as lightning in a bottle. I mean, come on, they got into the playoffs on a shootout in the last game of the season, right? So, yeah, okay, they got into playoffs and they caught fire when they got into playoffs, and they legitimately beat the teams that they beat. They really didn't catch any breaks. They beat some good teams and they got to the finals, and they kind of ran out of gas against the Blackhawks. Blackhawks are probably a better team than them, but that's neither here nor there in my diatribe here. I don't think it's a coincidence that the NHL salary cap was introduced in the 2005-2006 season. Now, again, you go back to Ed Snyder, and I think he was a passionate owner. He wanted to win at any cost. He was a guy who, a free agent was available, he's going to go and try to sign him. He don't care what it costs. He just wants to win. And I think we have an owner like that right now with the Phillies. I think Middleton is kind of doing that, and we see how exciting that is. They have a tax, and not really a hard cap, where the NHL has a hard cap. I don't think the Flyers ever kind of adjusted to the salary cap, right? So, once that happened, and then they started signing people, and you're signing your Vinny Lecavaliers who are done, and things like that. You make a bad signing when you have a cap, you're in big trouble, right? You can't recover from that like you could back in the day. But in any event, Snyder passed away. He got sick. He passed away in April of 2016. I'm sorry. And I think, during his last years, they knew he was sick. They wanted to try to win. So instead of rebuilding in his final years, they were trying to win. Okay, understandable. Once Snyder passes away, in the 2016-2017 offseason, they should have done a complete rebuild at that point. They didn't. Comcast is a corporate owner. They have zero passion. They could care less. They only about winning. They only care about selling tickets and the bottom line. All right. They never wanted to take it on the chin for a year or two by trading Giroux in his prime for a boatload of prospects and young players, like they could have did in 2016, 2017. And they didn't. So the team remained in purgatory, not good enough to win, not bad enough to get draft picks to improve. And now it's turned into a complete and utter disaster. I mean, it's bad news. They tried to sell at this trade deadline. They didn't have anybody, wanted anybody. Like, they couldn't sell. They just painted themselves into a corner that it's kind of hard to get out of. I think what is needed to happen, I don't care that they fired Fletcher. I think he was a total puppet for the Comcast corporate, for the organization. He was a puppet. They were telling him what to do. They were telling him because there's no true NHL general manager who's going to look at that team and think that you could, make that team a winner. Like that they just don't have enough talent. And Comcast just don't want to take it on the chin. I think Comcast needs to sell the team. Needs to be bought by somebody who has passion. Now, I saw the other day that David Boreanaz, he's an actor. I don't know if you saw that. There was a picture of him and Peter Forsberg and Kimmo Timonen, and then one of the Sixers co-owners, Adelman. And there's rumors that they're, trying to make an offer for the Flyers. I think that would be phenomenal. Now, Adelman's got a piece of the Devils, so he would have to divest that piece of the Devils, obviously. I think that's what's needed. And my point when you mentioned, getting the first pick in the draft, my theory is if you look at the bottom 5 teams, the Flyers have now sunk to the 5th worst team in the league, right? Montreal 6th. But the other bottom 5 are in no particular order, are the Blackhawks, the Coyotes, Anaheim, and San Jose. All right. Now, I kind of think, conspiracy theorist that I am, I kind of think that these draft picks, these top picks that are stars, the leagues know where they're going to go, right? Pittsburgh was in trouble back in the day. All of a sudden, they win the Sidney Crosby sweepstakes, right? Back in the NBA, Patrick Ewing goes to the Knicks. I think the NHL needs the Flyers to be good, right? They need the Flyers to be relevant. The Flyers are anything but relevant right now. I could honestly see the NHL trying to get Bedard to the Flyers, right? The Blackhawks, they need to be relevant too, but they just came off a dynasty. They just won 3 cups. I don't see the NHL wanting Bedard to go to San Jose or Arizona or Anaheim. And maybe Montreal, they would probably like to see Montreal be relevant again too. But I'm thinking more Flyers might have a shot at him. Any thoughts on that? Like I know it's kind of wild to think that the leagues kind of know where that pick's gonna go, but
I mean, from recent experience, the league owes him one then because we ended up with Van Riemsdyk instead of Patrick Kane the one year when we had the worst record in the league. That's true. I mean, I'm sure the league wants the Flyers relevant. It's a major market that, I mean, look, you Comcast in the bottom dollar, like they're not selling whatever they're doing. They're not selling tickets, right? So you might as well just scrap the whole thing. And not to go too far back, but what you're saying before, like that, I think your timeline was right, especially in retrospect. But what confused me in the whole thing was, like, you trade a young guy like Shen, right? And you got some picks. I'm fine with that. Like, okay, look, you needed more pieces, but then you hold on to Giroux for 3 extra years, and it's like you should have dumped him then and embraced it more, and it gives you more lottery tickets, more chances to get some guys that'll come in and help. And the salary cap era of the league has been a problem, and I'd say, you can say they weren't true contenders, but since the salary cap era came into effect, their best run, I would say would be 2008 through, say, like 12, where they won, I think it was like 4 out of 5 years, they won at least one playoff round. They went to the Cup Finals that year, and then they went to a Conference Finals another year. Well, what was key to those teams? You had younger guys that you had drafted and were on lower scale contracts. You weren't going out and spending a ton of money on free agent. Yeah, you brought Pronger in, but I mean, he was worth every penny when he was healthy. He made that whole team better. Yeah. They weren't going out and spending ridiculous amounts on a lot of free. They did spend on Briere, but Briere, come playoff time, was as good a player as they had, in that era. But your Richards, your Carters, Giroux when he came up, some of the young defensemen that were around, and Timonen was on a reasonable contract too. They're making trades for him. So what they did to tear down that first set of guys they signed, getting rid of Forsberg and all them that they brought in at the cap era, they didn't do in 2016, right? To get to do that. But that was a bit. But the other thing, it's always goaltending. Not that that's the biggest problem, but the year in and year out, even from when they started getting good again, when Lindros started getting good, Hextall would start the season, but it was Hextall to Garth Snow, back to Hextall to Sean Burke to Van Beesbrook, and I'll say this: you want to talk about spending money? 1998, going into free agency, you had three big goalies coming out as free agents. He had Curtis Joseph, Eddie Belfour, and Van Beesbrook. And we signed Van Beesbrook. And he didn't play terrible, but I wanted Belfour so bad. And of course, he wins the cup that year with Dallas.
That was Bobby Clark. I love Bobby Clark, and I think Bobby Clark was a better general manager than people think. But Bobby Clark never thought that the goaltender was as crucial as we know now. And I think he's come out and said it like he was wrong.
And, I mean, the other, obviously, I guess, Mark, if you want to call it, in the Snyder era was resistance to bring some of the Eastern European players in. I mean, they stayed good through the end of the 80s, but then those 5 years until Lindros really got good, they were behind the 8 ball. They had Renberg and really nobody else that was coming from those countries.
You drafted Mike Ricci over Jaromir Jagr.
Yeah, right. And you got, you had Forsberg, you traded for Lindros. Okay, I'm not going to complain about that, but those are moves that you made that you had a resistance to those type of players, and it didn't help you. So there's a lot of stuff to untangle over the last 30 plus years, of the team. But to go back to, you're talking about the ownership change. If that's in the cards, the Sixers owner is interesting because what are the Sixers trying to get right now? They want the new arena. Yeah. And they're saying we can't be a tenant at Wells Fargo. What's this? And I don't know how. I'm still less than 50-50 that they're going to get that deal done because Chinatown is very much against it and all that.
Where would it be? I'm sorry. Where are they proposing that to be?
11th and Market.
At 11. So where the gallery is.
They would take the end of the gallery and build up over the train stop there, and go back. It'd be 10th to 11th Market to either Filbert or something else, whatever those rear streets are. And they would, eventually they would be building out with shops and that kind of stuff. And so, but the arena itself would be like that block, let's just say. Well, if this guy buys or has a piece of the Flyers, well, now you got a joint owner again, and that's really what kept the two teams together and kept what was originally Spectrum 2 into the core states into Wells Fargo. Now, Cats wanted to go to Jersey, and eventually when Snyder merged Spectacor with Comcast bought into the Sixers with Croce, and then everybody was under the same ownership. So that I could see that being a play as to get a piece of the Wells Fargo. Now, this guy owns parts of both teams, and he has, he's not paying rent. He's not the biggest majority owner in the Sixers, but who knows? And that could speak to maybe the staying down Wells Fargo if they don't think that they're going to get an arena somewhere else, and that might be a business move on their part. I don't know. It's interesting. They could think of, I guess. But I do think they got to sell. I think they do. And they brought a coach in that's not going to be here long. So if he's saying these guys get hurt or don't want to play, I guess you're not hurting anybody's feelings. Because you're going to need another coach at some point in the next couple of years, but you don't have a team that's ready to contend either. So it's sad, but it
really is sad. I look forward. There were seasons I didn't miss a minute. I watched every game and I was into every game and every game was exciting. I think the league has taken a step back. They don't let you fight anymore. They don't let you hit anymore. It's more of like a European style game. I don't think it's, I think of hockey's in the 80s and 90s. I was too young for the 70s, but 80s and 90s hockey, there was nothing better, especially the playoffs.
Yeah.
And the Flyers.
The 80s to me was the perfect mix. You had Gretzky putting up 1,000 points a year, whatever it was. You had a lot of high-scoring games, and you had guys that are brawling every night.
And rivalries, right? There's no rivalries anymore. You get
up
for so a Flyers-Rangers game, who cares?
They changed. The Flyers stayed with the Rangers and I guess the Devils in the divisions, but so many other teams changed over years. The Penguins weren't in the division for a while, Islanders weren't, so shifting around that kind of threw things off. Now they're in the same division as Carolina. They're not a natural rival. It's
Columbus. Who cares?
Yeah, It's not the. I mean, the style of game interests me less, than it did. But I mean, if you're competitive, like I would certainly be watching more Flyers games. And I think they sort of fell in the trap. With the pandemic year, they were one of the hotter teams in the league when they went on the break, and then they picked it back up, and they got like the first. They played well in that bubble coming out, and they went to 7 games against the Islanders in the second round. I think that might have lulled them into a false sense of this team could be really good again really soon. Because Provorov was playing well, he's regressed. I mean, pretty much everybody's regressed from that season, So I think that was maybe a little false hope as to what they could be in the near future over the last couple years. But there's a lot that needs to change if they want to be competitive, and it can start with getting Bedard if he's a generational talent. So we'll see.
Yeah, let's keep our fingers crossed. I mean, hopefully the NHL tries to entice a sale by dangling Bedard. You know what I mean? So,
it would be. I would not be against it. That's for sure. I mean, because with the cap, you don't need a corporate entity that has the deepest pockets in the world to spend money, because you can only spend but so much.
And you certainly don't need a corporate entity that doesn't care, that has no passion, that puts a vice president of finance into a role as the hockey operations guy. I mean, come on, it's just bad. It's bad news, and let's hope it's coming to an end. But what is coming to an end, I believe, unless you have anything else, is our episode number 45.
So I'll just mention one thing. I'm trying to drag it out to the end of the Purdue game because they're still losing with 30 seconds left now. But we'll see if we can do that live. They've been in official review for like 5 minutes with 30 seconds left, and Fairleigh Dickinson up
fairly ridiculous is going to win.
Yeah, that'd be crazy because the coach, they won the game the other night, and the coach said, "I won Purdue because we're going to beat them." And I'm like, oh, that's a big thing to say. It's a 16 seed because it's only happened once and they're up. But just to touch on the Sixers real quick, I don't know what the score is now. They were beaten.
They're up by like
100. Pretty bad. Yeah, I turned it off because they were up 20-something. But, bigger news, if you want to call it that, is the odds have shifted to Joel Embiid now being the MVP favorite, which a couple weeks ago we didn't think was probably going to happen. Purdue's getting the ball, so we'll see. 30 seconds looks like. But he is like, FanDuel's doing one live right now, and his odds were actually changed in game. Like, he was at even money to start, and I guess he played well enough that he dropped to like minus 110. I will likely put a small wager on Jokic at this point. I think it could swing back. I think the Sixers they can certainly get the 2 seed at this point. Those Boston losses hurt them, but Boston's not playing well, and they play one more time. I think the Sixers need to get to the 1 seed in the East, or Denver has to completely collapse. And there's more talk of, is Embiid worthy? I think these guys, but it's not coming from all the guys that vote. And the same thing kind of happened with Hurts, and Hurts was the betting favorite because he was taking money. But right before he got hurt, we talked about it on here, I put a bet on Mahomes because the guys that are actually voting were saying, like, if the Mahomes went, the Chiefs would be the worst team in the league. Not that, drastic, but Minshew could come in and run the Eagles. Well, he came in and he didn't, but Mahomes won the MVP. So I think that could swing a little bit back. Look, if he goes on the run where the Sixers get the 1 seed and he'll be certainly worthy. I'm not convinced he's the favorite right now. So I'm going to put a little bet on Jokic at plus 160. I think he is right now.
Yeah, see, what I think is against Jokic now he's getting into the territory of 3-time MVP, 3 times in a row, right? I mean, was it Bird, and who else was 3 in a row? Was it Kareem, maybe?
It's somebody. Well, one other thing about Embiid I forgot to mention, too. In the last, I think they went back 50 years. The most, I think if he plays the rest of his games, he'll get to 69. There's only one player in 50-something years that's won MVP play in less than 70 games in a year, and that was, I think, Bill Walton in the 70s. So It would be a historical precedent, and it might be worthy. Yeah, the 3 in a row would have been tough to do. But if they end up with the best record in the West or the best record in the league, I think, and the averages are triple-double, like, it's going to be hard not to give it to them unless the Sixers don't lose a game the rest of the year. But
don't the Sixers have technically either tied or a better record than them right now? I mean, you can
with Denver, they may, but they're still the 1 seed in the West. So if they end up coming out with a 1 seed out there and he's averaging triple-double, I just don't see Embiid getting it yet unless he ends up getting the Sixers to the 1 seed in the East, which would be a pretty big feat considering the schedules that Boston and Milwaukee have the rest of the way. And Milwaukee lost to a bad Indiana team last night, but so you never know. But the Sixers have so much tougher of a schedule still to go.
Sixers
So
got
we'll
the next couple of games are not tough, but then after that they go into a tough game.
They can't afford any hiccups these next couple games. Like I think Boston has 3 winning teams left on the rest of their schedule. Yeah, and the Sixers have like half of it is better. I mean, they got to go out west and play Warriors and Suns on a back-to-back.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah. How are we doing in the game?
12.3 to go. Fairleigh Dickinson is up 3, and I think Purdue still has the ball because it's gone out of bounds. I don't know if we can string it out that long, but with all the timeouts that happen, so
up to you. Well, we'll just make a prediction, Chalky. Maybe make yourself look like a star for the next show. Who's going to win?
I'm Purdue.
Of course.
I mean, apparently Dickinson's probably the favorite at this point, I'm guessing, but Purdue will find a way to win.
Purdue's going to win. All right, we're going to hold you to that. So, okay. Well, that was episode number 45 of Broad Street Hustle. Thanks for joining. Look for us on YouTube. And then all of the audio platforms that we're usually on, we'll be on there too. We will be back next week with more scintillating content. Chalky, thanks for joining. And we will see you guys soon. Thanks.
Have a good week.